So this lecture is an attempt to give you an alternative way to understand the written instructions in the web lecture about using the Indian princess to practice writing an analytical paragraph about an artifact. So where you really want to put in most of your time is that written lecture, because it walks through step by step with a big fat example paragraph how to do this. But I'm going to give a quick verbal summary so that gives you another option, an alternative way of seeing or thinking about this. So what we're trying to do here when we look at a written artifact like the Indian princess is make a connection between language and culture. Interpret what the language says on the literal, but more importantly, the symbolic level about the cultural tension we're exploring. When we put together a paragraph like that, we have to have something first. We have to have chosen a passage and have in mind the tension we want to write about. So before you start to write an analytical paragraph, you need to have that settled. So what's the passage you want to look at? What's the tension? And you're going to focus on a narrow passage, but you can refer, if you need to the whole scene from the play. So we're going to end up having a claim or topic sentence that says something like, what does Act 1, Scene 4 from the Indian Princess say about? But we're going to focus on the language from one particular passage that you've chosen, like the ones you did in your written journal. Once you've done that, then you're going to move to asking the guiding question. And I suggest that you type this out, even include it with your paragraph, the guiding question, and then below it the paragraph, not at the beginning of the paragraph, separate, guiding question, paragraph. But it's really simple. It's a formula. What does Act blank, Scene blank from the Indian Princess tell us about the tension between blank and blank in 19th century America? And if you look in this slide, I left out the phrase, the tension between. So tell us about the tension between blank and blank in 19th century America. And you want to use the exact words here. So it's aggressive masculinity and communal masculinity, traditional subordination, ideals of equality, racial hierarchy and racial equality, nature as commodity, nature as transcendent space, etc. Use the exact terms. Don't tweak them or change them. It will work better if you stick with the exact terms. It makes it easier for you to talk about them and be confident in your knowledge of them. So now you've got your question. Now's the part where you start trying to analyze specific words from the passage. And you want to move beyond just plot summary when you can and talk about the symbolic cultural meanings of words. When a character uses that word, how does it resonate in that culture given what's going on in the play and at the time the play is written? The thing we're trying to get to is, what does this scene tell us about how Americans living in that period understood this tension, what they thought about racial equality and racial hierarchy, what they thought about nature, what they thought about gender, what they thought about class, whatever. Okay, so whatever the tension is, we're trying to figure out, how does this language illuminate what they thought? Then after you've drafted up some sentences where you try to analyze the meaning of the words, then you are going to try to answer that guiding question. Okay, given everything I've written here, what do I really think they're saying about this tension? You're going to go back, you're going to remind yourself of the guiding question, and then you're going to answer it. And in your answer, you're going to use both terms. Remember, the reader's never going to see your guiding question in an actual paper, right? You're just putting it there right now as an exercise. But your first sentence, which will become your claim or your topic sentence, is going to use both terms so the reader knows exactly what you're doing. And you're going to use both terms even if you have an answer that emphasizes one over the other or points out the absence of one and the total importance of the other. Doesn't matter. You still want that frame. That's what gives your reader a sense of context and coherence as he or she is reading. Now, when you go to the written lecture that's vital to read, you will see concrete examples of these steps I'm presenting here. And then finally, you want to wrap up by seeing if you can work in a cultural context. And you have the various resources that I gave you in the first lecture, plus the timeline that I've added for you this time, the more detailed cultural timeline. You want to bring those two things together and see if you can find one thing, not a bunch of different things, one thing that was happening the year of the play, the few years before, the years after, that you think helps us understand what this means and how it means. Now, I know this isn't easy. You're not supposed to already know how to do this. You're taking this class to learn how to do this. But we've got to start somewhere. And we've spent the last few weeks looking at scenes, looking at artifacts, looking at language, looking at culture. We need to start pulling it all together. And this same methodology we're using for this exercise, we are going to use over and over and over again in this course. And well, for the next few weeks, it'll be a struggle. Usually around the second third of the course, things start to click, and by the end of the course, you're an ace at this, which is why, by the way, we have rewrite policies that allow you to go back and redo things, because by the end of the course, you're much better than you are at the beginning. So I don't want you freaking out about this. I want you to just take your best stab at it, and I want you to remember you got 3 primary goals here, right? You want to answer the guiding question, you want to analyze the language, you want to connect it to context. Those goals go all the way back to our course outcomes and objectives. The things we want to be able to do, right? We want to be able to analyze, synthesize, and contextualize. And those are exactly the kind of skills that we're using here. Thanks for your attention. Hope this video helps, but it'll only really make sense if you carefully read the lecture that's underneath it. See ya.